By the 5th or 6th morning the waters had subsided from the land, but the stream in the old riverbed was still high and swift, and there was no possibility of crossing it. On the 8th it was still too high for an entirely safe passage, but life in the inn had become next to insupportable by reason of the dirt, drunkenness, fighting, etc. So we made an effort to get away. In the midst of a heavy snowstorm we embarked in a canoe, taking our paddles aboard and towing our horses after us by their halters. The Prussian, Ollendorf, was in the bow with a paddle. Baloo paddled in the middle, and I sat in the stern holding the halters. When the horses lost their footing and began to swim, Ollendorf got frightened, for there was great danger that the horses would make our aim uncertain, and it was plain that if we failed to land at a certain spot, the current would throw us off and almost surely cast us into the main Carson, which was a boiling torrent now. Such a catastrophe would be death in all probability, for we would be swept to the sea in the sink, or overturned and drowned. We warned Ollendorf to keep his wits about him and handle himself carefully, but it was useless. The moment the bow touched the bank he made a spring, and the canoe whirled upside down in 10-foot water. Ollendorf seized some brush and dragged himself ashore, but Baloo and I had to swim for it, encumbered with our overcoats. But we held on to the canoe, and although we washed down nearly to the Carson, we managed to push the boat ashore and make a safe landing. We were cold and water-soaked, but safe. The horses made a landing too, but our saddles were gone, of course. We tied the animals in the sagebrush, and there they had to stay for 24 hours. We bailed out the canoe and ferried over some food and blankets for them, but we slept one more night in the inn before making another venture on our journey. The next morning it was still snowing furiously when we got away with our new stock of saddles and accoutrements. We mounted and started. The snow lay so deep on the ground that there was no sign of a road perceptible, and the snowfall was so thick that we could not see more than 100 yards ahead, else we could have guided our course by the mountain ranges. The case looked dubious, but Ollendorf said his instinct was as sensitive as any compass, and that he could strike a bee-line for Carson and never diverge from it. He said that if he were to straggle a single point out of true line, his instinct would assail him like an outraged conscience. Consequently, we dropped into his wake happy and content. For half an hour we poked along warily enough, but at the end of that time we came upon a fresh trail, and Ollendorf shouted proudly, "I knew I was as dead certain as a compass, boys. Here we are, right in somebody's tracks that will hunt the way for us without any trouble. Let's hurry up and join the company with the party." So we put the horses into as much of a trot as the deep snow would allow, and before long it was evident that we were gaining on our predecessors, for the tracks grew more distinct. We hurried along, and at the end of an hour the tracks looked still newer and fresher, but what surprised us was that the number of travelers in advance of us seemed to steadily increase. We wondered how so large a party came to be traveling at such a time, and in such a solitude. Somebody suggested it must be a company of soldiers from the fort, and so we accepted that solution and jogged along a little faster still, for they could not be far off now. But the tracks still multiplied, and we began to think the platoon of soldiers was miraculously expanding into a regiment. Baloo said they'd already increased to 500. Presently he stopped his horse and said, "Boys, these are our own tracks, and we've actually been circusing around and around in a circle for more than 2 hours out here in this blind desert. By George, this is perfectly hydraulic." Then the old man waxed wroth and abusive. He called Ollendorf all manner of hard names, said he never saw such a lurid fool as he was, and ended with a peculiarly venomous opinion that he did not know as much as a logarithm. We certainly had been following our own tracks. Ollendorf and his mental compass were in disgrace from that moment. After all our hard travel, here we were on the bank of the stream again, with the inn beyond dimly outlined through the driving snowfall. While we were considering what to do, the young Swede landed from the canoe and took his pedestrian way Carsonward, singing his same tiresome song about his sister and his brother and the child in the grave with its mother, and in a short minute faded and disappeared in the white oblivion. He was never heard of again. He no doubt got bewildered and lost, and fatigue delivered him over to sleep, and sleep betrayed him to death. Possibly he followed our treacherous tracks till he became exhausted and dropped. Presently the overland stage forded the now fast receding stream and started toward Carson on its first trip since the flood came. We hesitated no longer now, but took up our march in its wake and trotted merrily along, for we had good confidence in the driver's bump of locality. But our horses were no match for the fresh stage team. We were soon left out of sight, but it was no matter, for we had deep ruts of the wheels made for our guide. By this time it was 3 in the afternoon, and consequently it was not very long before night came, and not with a lingering twilight, but with a sudden shutting down like a cellar door, as is its habit in that country. The snowfall was still as thick as ever, and of course we could not see 15 steps before us, but all about us the white glare of the snowbed enabled us to discern the smooth sugarloaf mounds made by the covered sage bushes, and just in front of us the 2 faint grooves which we knew were the steadily filling and slowly disappearing wheel tracks. Now those sage bushes were all about the same height, 3 or 4 feet. They stood just about 7 feet apart all over the vast desert. Each of them was a mere snow mound now, in any direction that you proceeded, the same as in a well laid out orchard. You would find yourself moving down a distinctly defined avenue with a row of these snow mounds on either side of it. An avenue the customary width of a road, nice and level in its breadth, and rising at the sides in the most natural way, by reason of the mounds. But we had not thought of this. Then imagine the chilly thrill that shot through us when it finally occurred to us, far in the night, that since the last faint trace of the wheel tracks had long ago been buried from sight, we might now be wandering down a mere sagebrush avenue, miles away from the road and diverging further and further away from it all the time. Having a cake of ice slip down one's back is placid comfort compared to it. There was a sudden leap and a stir of blood that had been asleep for an hour, and a sudden arousing of all the drowsing activities in our minds and bodies. We were alive and awake at once, and shaking and quaking with consternation, too. There was an instant halting and dismounting, a bending low, and an anxious scanning of the roadbed. Useless, of course, for if a faint depression could not be discerned from an altitude of 4 or 5 feet above it, it certainly could not with one nose nearly against it.